Perfect. There we go. Okay. Can everyone see my screen? Perfect. So one of the last things on my introduction slide is just how my current role inspires my leadership studies. And so one of the reasons I was so interested in leadership is that, again, I landed in a leadership position in a very unique way. So an individual identified me as a leader in the classroom. I happen to have taught his children, and thought that that leadership skill would translate well into a principalship role. And so it's a very different path. So this was not something that I chose, rather on the flip side, I was selected for it. And when I stepped into this role, I was stepping in during a very unique time. So I was the youngest principal they'd ever had at age 27. I was actually the first female principal ever in this role. And I was following a series of older male principals. So it was a pretty dramatic shift for the school in general, even before they knew me and my leadership style of just how I was going to approach leadership, because I was much more on the same level with our younger family parents than with some who had been with the school for a long time. And so this really started to get me asking, what makes a great leader? And in my research that I did for my dissertation, I was able to study some specifics that I hope will be really beneficial to everyone today. Seeing in the chat, we have a lot of different types of leadership in the room. And so please know that I speak from the place of a principal, but I think you'll see really quickly that this is a widely applicable leadership study that I did. It's very much in tune with school climate, which we'll talk a lot about, which I'm sure in all of your roles is incredibly significant. So I really hope that you find this useful today. And I also want you to know that while I'm a fast talker and a lot of talker, please don't hesitate to unmute yourselves, ask questions along the way so that you can make sure that you get the most out of this session. I'm going to try to leave some time for Q&A at the end as well, but I want to make sure I give a kind of a holistic picture of this leadership style and school climate so that you can really find ways to apply it yourselves. So the first thing that I want to do before we dive in is let you know that our study today is really about a specific style of leadership and how it impacts school climate. And school climate is one of the terms that I had to define very clearly in my research because it's often combined and conflated with school culture. And so these terms are often used interchangeably, and actually a lot of empirical research does the same. And so I really tried to pull apart those definitions, and I wanted to clarify for you what we're really talking about today. And so on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see the definition of school culture, which is really those overall beliefs and values, traditions, a very long-term culture that's built up slowly. Whereas school climate, I like that they use the word vibe. This is a much more in the present. How is everybody in your building feeling? And outsiders who walk in can pick up on your climate. And so we'll define that a little bit more, but I want you to think about climate as a little bit more in the here and now, less based on tradition and more based on current circumstances. And there's a lot of reasons why that's really important. But to make that clarification is really important. And for me as a researcher, and I think for you in finding the most benefit in this presentation is really having a clear definition of the two. So primarily, if you wanted to really break it down, culture consists of shared assumptions and ideologies, whereas climate is defined by shared perceptions of behavior. So we're going to talk a lot more about behaviors today, leadership behaviors, behaviors of staff in your school, and really focusing on the staff rather than student level. And not that climate doesn't impact students, it absolutely does. But the goal of our talk is to really talk about the higher levels of school climate. And so for anyone who's in a leadership role, what I'm going to ask you today is to look at our relationship as leaders with our peers. So rather than focusing on how are our, let's say, teachers or other staff members interacting with their students, or even not as much how they're interacting with each other, but it's more about how are we as leaders interacting with them. And so it's a really specific viewpoint that we're taking today. And there's a reason that I chose this, especially for this talk. And in my research, I find that when you focus on climate, it's a little bit more universal. So all of us dropping in the chat, our school contexts are really varied, and your student population is going to really, really vary. So I'm up in Sheboygan at a small parochial school. My student population is very different than those of you who are working at Alverno College, right? It's very different than if you're working in MPS. So those school cultures will be really different. But climate's a little bit more universal. It's a little bit more about how we're interacting as adults. And while it's still going to change from building to building, there's a little more universality there that I think will let us all to talk a little bit more on the same level, despite our varied context. So I hope you find that to be the case. And then school climate has incredible, incredible benefits. And we're going to talk a little bit about how certain elements of climate we take for granted and we maybe don't view as important when they are actually much more critical than we would think. And there's incredible benefit for teachers, which, as we all know, working in the school context, we have incredible turnover rates right now. Burnout is at an all-time high. Teacher retention is incredibly challenging no matter what your context is. And so we're always looking for solutions. How do we keep teachers highly motivated? How do we keep great teachers in the field? And how do we make sure that they are continuing to want to strive to be better? And then this is really going to have a great trickle-down effect also to your students in their achievement, in their feelings of safety, in their feelings of mental health. And so it really is a top-down approach of those of us that are serving in leadership positions, focusing on these elements of leadership and climate so that it can trickle down to our student population. And one of the things that I really wanted to highlight today is that positive school climate starts with leadership. And oftentimes when we step into school roles, it's really easy to start pointing to other factors. So we point to the parents that we're interacting with or to the specific student population that we're interacting with. And we say that those are what are impacting the climate. And what I'm going to challenge you today is to instead take a really close look at yourself. Maybe there's a conversation that you go back and have with other leaders at your school to say, actually, we want to talk just about our leadership, just about the things that we as leaders are doing, because the research shows that leadership is one of the most, if not the most important influence on school climate. So this is a huge responsibility that we shoulder as leaders. So what the research is showing is what we do, the decisions that we make as leaders are one of the most critical components of our entire school climate. And so what that means is that we have to be intentional. We have to be focused on our leadership and making sure that we are using all of the tools in our toolkit to be the absolute best leaders we can be. And so one of the questions we want to answer today is, how do we lead in a way that we promote positive climate? And specifically what we'll talk about today is called open school climate. And again, some of these terms might be familiar to you, and along the way, some of these things might feel like, okay, yeah, I've heard things like this before, but putting it all together in one package might be something you're not quite as familiar with. So there's a certain type of climate called open school climate. And I define it for you very specifically here. So it's characterized by supportive, participative, and trusting qualities, a comfortableness in expressing opinions, voicing complaints, and offering suggestions for improvement, and an abundance, notice that word, of communication, where information is exchanged upward, downward, and horizontally through the organization, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And so there's some really specific behaviors that we can see by principals, leaders, staff members in open climates. Okay, so in an open climate, your leader, whether that's a principal or someone on your administrative team, they're listening and implementing ideas. They're praising teachers and other staff frequently. They're granting their staff members and subordinates autonomy to perform tasks without close scrutiny and providing facilitating leadership devoid of bureaucratic trivia, right? So in layman's terms, we are letting teachers do what they do best, trusting them as professionals, praising them and lifting them up. And we'll talk about how we also help them develop professionally. But this is the type of behaviors you should expect in an open climate from leadership. Meanwhile, the staff, the other members of the team within an open climate have close relationships with each other, cooperate well with others, show high levels of commitment, and they feel supported, valued, and unafraid to ask questions and give feedback. And then finally, open climate promotes them to engage in positive interpersonal relationships. And so some of you are probably already thinking about the team that you work with or the school climate that you work within right now. And I want you to be thinking about that. Do you think that this is how individuals in your school feel? Is this how leadership operates in your school? And if the answer is yes, yay, that's very exciting. And we'll talk about some of the leadership practices that are perhaps contributing to that, and maybe some things that you can also do to help contribute to that open climate. If the answer is no, you might be feeling like, okay, but how do you fix it, right? Maybe some of us are working in a staff that does not have great communication, or where we are not being lifted up. Maybe we're feeling like we're a little bit on an island. And it's hard if you're not in a position of complete leadership where you can completely, control some of these things. But anytime you sit in a leadership role, whether that be as a principal, as a school counselor, anywhere on that admin team, there's a certain amount of, we'll say, kind of control and power that you have over groups of individuals and people that you can still influence. And so finding ways to help contribute to this open climate is critical. And again, this open climate benefits at the staff level, then trickles down to students as well. So again, the goal today is to talk about this transformational leadership style, which I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with this particular style. It could very well be that once we get into it, you recognize perhaps some of these behaviors. But if you haven't studied this style of leadership specifically, I want to introduce it to you, especially because, as we'll talk about, it's a very practical style of leadership. So as you all know, there's a ton of leadership styles, and it's hard to say that you as an individual practice an exact specific style, right? We all practice hybrid styles of leadership. We make decisions that are based on our personalities. They're based on our strengths and weaknesses. They're based on our past experiences. We bring a lot into our leadership and into our choices that we make. But we also realize that leadership style is not fixed. We can grow, we can change, and we can also practice and put into practice elements from other leadership style that maybe are not instinctive for us. And so for some of us, this will be a challenge. It will push you to grow and to change and to maybe make some different decisions as you kind of close up one year and head into the next, to reconsider some of the approaches that you are making. And the style that we're talking about today, as I mentioned, is transformational leadership. And so this is a style that has been shown through research to positively impact school climate. So this is found in empirical research that I did for my dissertation. And then when I performed my own research, I found the same results. So transformational leadership style is positively correlated to open school climate. The more transformational you are, the more open and positive your school climate becomes. So seeing that research, seeing that correlation means this is something we should pay attention to. When we have evidence of research over a myriad of years, then it is time to focus in and to pay attention. What I love about this leadership style and why I picked it is because I truly believe that this is a practical style of leadership that can be learned and practiced. I'm not saying that every part of it will be natural or that every part of it you'll be able to do perfectly, but there are certain elements that I know in my own practice, I've been able to, with intentionality, improve in these areas and in general, then improve our school climate. So it's based off of 6 practices, okay? And Podzakov is an author that I use. He developed a great research tool that I used in my study to help measure this. And so these are 6 practices that transformational leaders do that over the course of studies that their followers have said, these are the characteristics that make them transformational. And then these are the characteristics that then go on to prove, again, and I study in a school context, but this is proven across organizational contexts. So articulating a vision, providing an appropriate model, fostering acceptance of group goals, setting high performance expectations, providing individualized support, and offering intellectual stimulation. These are the 6 characteristics, and we're going to break down each one of them. So if you're jotting things down, don't feel like you have to get down all 6 right now. But these are the things that we are going to focus on and break down. And before we do that, one of the things that I like to talk about is that it's one of the questions that's always asked. Okay, so you say that it works, the research shows that it works, but why? This whole leadership style is really based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And the goal is to take, we'll say from a leader, take our followers up higher in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, actually to the very top tier, to the self-actualization phase of achieving one's full potential. And so this is a leadership style that is meant to take your employees from the kind of psychological needs, helping fulfill those, but then actually boosting them to the next level. So our goal here is to help our employees become leaders themselves, yes, but to also feel fully satisfied in their current vocation, which again, if we take this back to teacher retention, teacher satisfaction, this is critical. Okay, making sure that the highest level of needs of our followers are met. So that's why this style of leadership is unique, and that's why it's shown to work. So let's go through each of these. And I'll have some questions for reflection along the way. Again, at the end, we'll have a little bit of time to kind of talk through things. I really would love to give people a chance to share some best practices. So really my goal is just to give an overview of each of these. And again, if you have questions, comments, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask along the way. So the first one is articulate a vision. And a lot of us, myself included, I'm not really a vision person. I'm a day-to-day logistics person. That's why I'm a principal, not a head of schools or executive director. But when you break it down to kind of what the goal of vision planning is, it's identifying new opportunities, right? That's what it means to have a vision. We need new opportunities. Where do we want to go from here? But the key in terms of transformational leadership is not just that you have a vision, it's how you articulate it, which is why it's part of it, okay? So first of all, when you're identifying this vision in a transformational leadership setting, you want this to be highly aligned with organizational vision as a whole and with your organizational purpose. So I'm sure all of you are working in organizations that have a mission statement, that have a vision statement, some of these things that you're working towards. So when you're looking for new opportunities, your vision should be in line with those. But from a communication end, the vision should be communicated widely and frequently. One of the courses that I took during my doctoral studies was about organizational change and organizational change management and how to successfully push through change. And whenever you're proposing a vision, right, new vision, you have to really get people on board. And one of the things that they talk about very specifically is communicating widely and frequently. And one of the specific elements of transformational leadership, and this one's always tricky because I think sometimes this one is harder to learn and practice. This is a little bit more innate, but really in transformational leadership, there's a requirement of some charisma from a leadership perspective. And underneath the umbrella of charisma, they add enthusiasm, being able to command respect, inspire loyalty, and to really tap into subordinates' emotions, okay? And so this approach is very much where you set the tone as the leader. And oftentimes when we are in leadership positions, we do not feel excited every day. Especially those of you who are in school counselor positions, you are shouldering incredible emotional burden on top of your logistic work burden, right? So we have a lot of days that when we come to work, it's as much as we can do to get through our to-do list. And so the challenge of being the leader is understanding that you are also the tone setter. And this is critical when you are setting and communicating vision. If you are not enthusiastic, if you are not excited, and if you are not the person who is bringing others on board with you, then you can't be surprised when nobody joins you. And so your goal is to bring your team willingly alongside of you. And of course, we all know the key word is willingly. Whenever we're going into any sort of change, articulating a new vision, we should expect to face resistance, right? So it's all about how we preemptively plan for this, how we make sure that people are fully informed with communication, and how we approach these things that's critical. And this requires an emotional approach. And that's something else that we'll talk about too. Oftentimes we are concerned about letting too much emotion into our job. I understand that. I am not an emotional person, but I have learned as a leader that just because I am not an emotional person does not mean the people working around me are also not emotional people. Instead, I have an incredible variety of personalities on my staff, and some have higher emotional needs than others. And so as we move along through this process, coming to terms with the fact that this emotional part of leadership is incredibly important, especially when it comes to articulating a vision, okay? So you have to be able to inspire that passion. And this requires a fostering of group goals, which we will talk a little bit about later. So it's how do we get everybody on board to come along with us? The next component is providing an appropriate model. And so I put a little real talk here, which I mentioned earlier. If the real talk is that we as leaders are the primary influence on climate, we'll take that what the research has said and we'll say that that's true, then our energy and focus matter. So we are consciously or unconsciously the role models for the people who serve below us. So whether we want to be or not, they are looking to us as role models. And what does that mean? First of all, we serve as the symbol of success and accomplishment. So what are we doing to be that model? How are we personally striving for success or accomplishment? And how are we doing that for our organization? So when the people who are following or underneath us are looking at us as role models, what do they see us doing personally and at an organizational level that proves that we are constantly walking and talking the mission and vision of the organization, and that we are also personally completely dead set on improvement, personal improvement and organizational improvement. And again, we can't just talk about it. We have to actually do it. I put at the next point, we are also the walking, talking mission and vision of the organization. So if you are in a leadership role, the mission and vision of your organization is yours to embody. And the people around you expect to see you living it out. So the question is, do you live the vision? Do you live the mission? Is it in your oral and written communication? Is it in the way that you communicate with your peers? Is it in the way that you talk about others in your building or parents or students? Is that flowing through you at all times? Are we living it or are we talking about it? Because it's really easy to be in a setting, especially in a school setting, where everybody is just worried again about their to-do list, they're task-oriented, trying to get through the day. Are we living the mission or are we just talking about it? And this is an important question that we'll have to ask ourselves and also ask our leadership teams, which hopefully you're able to bring some of this back to them. The other question is, and I asked this from a school administrative perspective, but you can put this into your own context, is one of the things that I ask school leaders is, have your teachers seen you lead in a classroom? Have they seen you do what you're asking them to do? So maybe the question for school counselors is, have your teachers seen you do what you're asking them to do in their classrooms? Are you helping lead their talks on mental health with their students? Are you helping them learn some of these concepts? Are you modeling that for them as well? Because a lot of times we love giving exactly what I'm doing right now, giving a presentation, giving a packet of information, handing those things over. But we all know that what you give on paper is not the same as what you see acted out. So where can you find opportunities to be that walking and talking model so that people aren't just seeing it in paper, they're seeing it in person? The third one is the fostering of group goals. So to me, this one is really challenging because I think when we all hear, I shouldn't say all, I should never generalize, but a lot of times when we hear things like, oh, we're going to do a team building activity, half the group kind of groans like, oh gosh, here we go. We're going to build a human ladder, or we're going to do one of those activities where everybody has a piece of paper and you have to walk around and find someone and sign it. And it's very easy for us to kind of trivialize those activities. But even worse than that, it's easier for us to say, nobody really likes these, so we're just not going to do them, right? And so my thing is, I understand that some of those activities probably aren't as effective as they need to be. So what you need to do as a leader is figure out, okay, so what does work with my group of people, with my team? All of our teams are going to be different, but there has to be time set aside for collegial activities. Collegial meaning off campus or on campus, but doing something fun. I don't know if those two things ever, really happen in the same way, but creating opportunities for people to interact with one another outside of work, where they can get to know one another as individuals. And realize that not everybody will take advantage of all opportunities that you give. However, if our approach is, since not everybody takes advantage of it, we just shouldn't bother, then we are completely isolating the demographic of people who need this in order to function their best on a team. So we're setting aside time for that. We're setting aside time for professional development, which I'm sure a lot of you are doing in your organizations. And I would love to hear a little bit later about those of you who feel like your organization is doing this really well. Like, hey, here's some things that my organization does great in terms of how we structure our professional development, because I think that's an area where there's a lot of frustration in how schools structure professional development in a way that perhaps some people don't feel like it's effective for their group. Also, a time for reflective study. So there are times that in our professional development as a staff, I'm putting people into small groups and we're doing some own leadership reflective study. And so it's personal, and it's forcing reflection, because as reflective practitioners, as we're asked to be, is a wonderful sentiment. But if we're not creating space and time to do it, we're asking a lot of our team members to do that on their own time. If you're like me, I like goals and I like expectations and I like deadlines. And if you take those things away from me, it's much harder for me to do the things that I know I should be doing. And then time for collective governance, which I know, again, we're all in very different organizational contexts, but we're going to talk a lot about how one of the ways that you become a transformational leadership is granting some autonomy to your followers and making sure that they feel like intellectual equals and equal members of the team. And when you do that, and when you allow for some more collective governance, when you're giving the members of your team a voice, when you're validating their professionalism and their value as a team member, it makes a difference in what they then want to give you as a team member on the flip side. So we're helping each other work towards common goals. And again, we're not always going to see eye to eye, but this requires setting aside individual desires for the good of the group, which means you have to be able to see the benefits of the group. This also requires an incredible amount of trust. So those of you who have worked with really effective leaders, I'm sure that they are people that you trust. And a lot of development of trust and building of trust takes time and intentionality. But a foundation of trust for a staff allows people to take risks and encourages people to jump on board, even if they might have done something a little differently, or even if they felt like there's something being put on them that they, wouldn't have been their first choice. But once you have established trust and collegiality and a feeling of safety and security, it helps motivate individual people to say, it wouldn't have been my first choice, but for you and for the team, I'll do it. Right? That's the attitude that we want, so that we can push our organizations forward, so that we can try new things, so that we can improve without constantly having an underlying current of dissension and an underlying current of resistance. And some of you might be in situations where that's how you feel. Every time a new initiative is brought forward, there's the group of naysayers where nothing can ever go far enough, because there's the group that won't jump on board. So the question is, what can be done behind the scenes to help facilitate some of this camaraderie and trust to help get those people on board? And so my last point there is, we don't always like to admit that it's all about relationships, but it is. And as educators, we're really good about saying this with our students. Oh, it's all about relationships with our students, right? We have to establish rapport. We have to establish trust. That's how we get the best out of our students. But it's harder for us to do that with all of the adults in our life. It's harder for us to do that with our colleagues, because sometimes people are really hard to work with. And with our students, we kind of feel like we have that obligation, but I have to figure it out because I'm the teacher, I'm the adult. But with our peers, it's much easier to throw in the towel and say, this person just doesn't do it for me, so I'm just going to practice the avoidance technique. And the problem is if that becomes the climate in your school, where everybody's an island and no one is working together, then again, when we go back to this articulating a vision and pushing something forward, there's nobody on the boat. Everybody is stuck on their own island. So the next thing the leader is expected to do then is to also set high performance expectations. So if we go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, humans have a desire to achieve our fullest potential. This is what we want. But I put a little note in here. And again, I don't want to generalize, but I'm saying that in my experience and from what I've seen, if we as leaders are not setting a high bar, those who are working around us will have a hard time setting their own. And it has nothing to do with lack of desire. I'm sure that you, like me, work with phenomenal teachers who want to improve, who want to do these things. But if we're being honest, the day-to-day demands on a teacher do not allow for the extra time to strive for these things. And so once again, if we as leaders are helping teachers set these goals, hold them accountable for these goals, both inside the classroom and outside of the classroom goals, based on our observations, based on our conversations, based on our interactions. If we're doing this for our teachers, it helps them set those goals and then actually reach them because there's accountability. It's much easier to be accountable to somebody else than to be accountable for yourself, especially if you are in a school climate where you are not feeling supported, where you are not feeling like you're making a difference, and where you're not feeling validated by your leaders. Those are the school climate settings that you start going, why am I bothering to go above and beyond? Nobody else is. So I'm going to keep my head down. I'm going to do the bare minimum. I'm going to punch the clock and I'm going to go. And these are the environments where we can't keep teachers, which then, of course, impacts everything else about the educational process for our kids. So what we also have to do for our teachers, for our staff, for the other members of our leadership team is to articulate our confidence in their ability to achieve the goals that we have set. Okay, so we've all heard of the growth mindset. We talk about it a lot, not having this fixed mindset, but of having this growth mindset of I can improve, I can be better. So letting people know what we're setting for you right now is a challenging goal. But I've seen the evidence that shows me that you can do this. You have the talent, you have the gifts, you have the skills. I have full confidence that you can do this, and I'm going to be here to help you do it. Making sure that they understand, I am going to set high expectations for you because I know you can achieve them. I have full confidence in your abilities. And if you need my help along the way, I'm here to support you. So you set the bar, and then you establish the confidence to help them reach the bar. And then the next thing that you do is intentionality. We're talking about intentional leadership, is also identifying your strongest leaders on staff and training them intentionally. And this is not does not have anything to do with playing favorites. This doesn't have anything to do with you're a better teacher than somebody else. It's not that. It's taking a look for some of these leadership characteristics, some of these transformational leadership characteristics that you already see in those people and say, hey, I see this potential for you. I'm going to give you opportunities that have a high possibility of success to help you build confidence as a leader, because someday I want you to be here. Because we all know that the best leaders are surrounded by a whole team of leaders. And our best schools have teachers who are as confident of leaders as the administrators, as the administrative team that's overseeing them. But it has to be identified, it has to be intentional, and then you have to give them the opportunity to be successful in those opportunities. And finally, individualized support. Leaders should have a developmental orientation towards followers. And this really supports what we had just talked about on the last slide here. So our goal is to develop other leaders. And when that is your mindset, it changes the way that you interact with those who you are working with. If my goal is to make that teacher a better leader, what does that mean about how I help her set goals? What does that mean about how I do my observation and evaluation? What does that mean about how I help the teachers in my building also become leaders in things like supporting students in their mental, social, emotional health? How am I helping them lead as well? This requires assigning tasks on an individual basis. Again, we have to look at fair isn't always equal, right? We have to make sure that we are identifying the strengths and weaknesses of those who we lead and helping them have tasks that play into their strengths, that help them grow in their weaknesses, but also where they can feel successful. We have to show a genuine interest in individuals. And whether this is at the teacher level, at the student level, we understand the importance and significance. If we want to take it down to the student level, when we show interest in our students, when we show them that we care by showing up for an event outside of school, by going the extra mile with helping them with an assignment after school, by leading one of their clubs, it changes the experience for the student. We know that. We've all seen this in practice in our roles. So why aren't we always doing the same thing as leaders with those around us? Why don't we translate that on the peer level? Why aren't we showing the same amount of genuine individual interest for every member of our staff? Because if we could truly do that, if we could make it a goal to be a better leader to the individual members of our staff, to show a genuine interest, to find their sources of motivation. Imagine how that could change the experience for some of those teachers. I know a lot of our schools, my school included, has a mentorship program. And when new teachers come on board, you probably have, they're assigned a mentor. And one of the things I always challenge leaders to do is make sure you're part of the mentorship program. And I know a lot of us are at large organizations, and that's easier said than done. But what part of it as a leader are you in the mentorship program? To make sure, again, that you are showing, I care about you as an individual. I care about you as a new teacher, or I care about you as just a new member to the staff, about learning about this organization. And what's critical, and again, I'm going to say we all see the irony here, because I understand that we are face-to-face, but we are also not face-to-face. And I know, I'm sure you, along with myself, we have switched a lot of things over to virtual, especially since the pandemic. But this support, this individualized support, should 100% happen face-to-face. So all of the research shows that oral conversation is a better basis for organizational decision-making. Not memos, not emails, not agendas with meeting minutes, face-to-face. For actual decision-making, this is how it should happen. And oral communication should be two-way. Followers deserve to be fully informed with proactive, not reactive communication. We have all been in a situation where we find something out in our school setting that happened. We were not clued in. And by the time we find out about it, we look like an idiot or we feel like an idiot. And when you are in the follower role, that is incredibly challenging for how do I communicate this with my peers? How do I manage what I'm feeling, the frustration that I'm feeling? And how do I articulate to my leader that all I needed was a heads up and I wouldn't be feeling any of this? And as someone who is a leader who's always working on her communication style, I know that I still do this. I still do this where people go, a heads up would have been nice. And so it's constantly thinking, what are the things that need to be communicated to make sure that everybody around me is successful? What does everybody on my team need to know about other peers on the team, student issues on the team, or other organizational issues that are coming up or coming down the docket? I think a lot of time when we're in a leadership role, we try to protect people by withholding information until we think it's absolutely necessary because we don't want to cause undue stress or panic. We worry about confidentiality, and all of those things are valid. I completely understand that. And sometimes you have to use discretion. You can't communicate everything immediately. But we also have to remember that the people who serve around us are not bystanders. They are full-fledged team members. And so they're on a different level than those outside of the organization. And so we have to be cognizant of how are we being intentional with communication? How are we making sure that our followers feel like, hey, I am in the loop. I know what's going on with that student. I know what's going on with that family. I have enough information that I can do my job at the highest level. So as leaders, we have to balance that. We have to balance confidentiality with also making sure that our followers are fully informed. But I think when I look at communication, I tend to say, okay, I would rather over communicate than under communicate, because I have a lot less negative ramifications for over communicating than under communicating. And whenever possible, I'm going to proactively communicate, because we all know that reactive communication 9 out of 10 times does not work. It usually something falls apart when we're reactive rather than proactive. So one of the things that I want to talk about is the Allen curve. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this. I put it on the next slide about this face-to-face communication. This is fascinating. I read about this in the Culture Code, which is one of my favorite books. And it talks about, if you can take a look at the chart here in front of you, the frequency of communication versus the distance of separation. This means physical separation between you and that person. So check out on that slope how dramatically frequency of communication drops when you hit 8 meters. 8 meters. In my organization, we have 2 buildings. We have a preschool building, we have a day school building. Our preschool building is 1 block away. It's essentially the length of a parking lot. The length of that parking lot, and my first couple of years here, the effect that it had on communication was astronomical. And I could not figure out why, my child care director, why are we not communicating? Why is this not working? And I looked at the Allen curve and I went, whoa, this is it. This is it. Because this physical distance has incredible effect on how much we communicate with people. So my downstairs teachers and the upstairs teachers say all the time, we just don't communicate enough. But my teachers that are right across the hall, they're fine. And the thing is, this is not just oral communication. This is what's so funny. This drop-off includes written communication, email. So you actually even interact less via email with the people who are more than 8 meters away from you. So when you think about that, you have to look at your building. How often are you within 8 meters of proximity with the people that you work with your colleagues, with the people that you're mentoring, with your team? Has your school switched over to entire Zoom meetings? Because then you never are, unless you physically go into someone's room or into someone's workspace. So if you take nothing away from this presentation except for the Allen curve, take the Allen curve, tuck it in the back of your mind and try it. Put yourself in physical less than 8 meter distance with the person who you struggle communicating with the most and see what it does. I can tell you what it did for me. My childcare director and I realized that we were not having physical face-to-face meetings every week. We were, but it wasn't scheduled, it wasn't consistent. When we made the intentional change to schedule that meeting face-to-face, even if we had nothing to talk about, nothing pressing, we did it anyway. Our communication entirely changed, completely changed. So I really want you to think about that. When it comes to individual support, proximity makes a difference. When you're supporting those who are your followers, be close to them. That physical presence is important. The other one that we want to talk about is intellectual stimulation. And I mentioned this a little bit earlier. We want the people who are around us, below us, our followers, our team members, to be treated as intellectual equals. And what this means is that we as leaders have to actually articulate what we discern, comprehend, visualize, and conceptualize. So we have to be able to share these thoughts and invite those people into the conversation. It is really easy for us who sit on administrative teams to work within that team and to make a whole lot of decisions without inviting anybody else into the conversation. And oftentimes what that does for those who are followers, it makes them feel like they are not worthy of being part of the conversation, that their ideas and thoughts don't matter because all of the big decisions happen without them. And I don't know about you, but as a leader, what I've discovered is that 95% of the people in this building have things way more figured out than I do. Because while I am in the classroom, I do teach a little bit of 8th grade. I teach some writing and some literature because it's what I love to teach. They are so in tune in the classroom with best practices, with what our families need, with what our students need. They're in it. And so why am I doing vision and organizational planning without including them in the conversation when they are the ones who are carrying these things out in the day-to-day functions of our organization? So then also as leaders, it is our job to help provide them with innovative ways to problem solve and to give them new perspective. Again, we can't do this unless we are giving individual attention to our teachers, right? We can't help them problem solve if we have not established a relationship and a rapport where they feel comfortable coming to me with their problems or with their ideas. If they're not comfortable doing that, if we haven't done the work, then this will never happen. So my question to you as a leader is, do you feel like you can do this? Because I don't know about you, but the word innovative always scares me a little bit because I don't consider myself to be a super innovative person. I'm kind of like hey, if it works, let's do it. But I took a few courses that talked about innovation, about finding new solutions to problems, about thinking outside of the box. And it made me realize, again, it was something that I thought was really interesting. One of the books I read talks about how innovation can also be learned. And I was like, hallelujah, I'm not an innovative person, but apparently I can learn how to do it, how it can be practiced and some techniques to help you be more innovative. And so the question is, do you feel like as a leader that you can do this? Do you feel like you're able to help problem solve? You're able to offer new perspective? And if you're not, what are you doing about it? How are you developing as a leader to be someone who can come with more ideas? What are you reading? What coursework are you taking? What best practices are you testing so that you can be this person? This goes back to being that role model. Again, there's a heavy weight on our shoulders. This is asking a lot out of a leader. but it's part of what we need to be able to do to help take our educational organizations to the next level, to open up this climate and to create a better workspace. And one of the ways that you can do this is to be transparent about organizational threats and opportunities. And I'm sure many of you have heard of the SWOT analysis. I put it on the next slide here. And this is something that I've done with teachers. I've done it for myself. I've done it with teachers on an individual level, but it's also a great thing to do as a team at the organizational level. What are our organizational strengths? What are our weaknesses? What are our opportunities? And what are our threats? And do this with your team. Get their input. You'll be shocked to see what they see as a strength that you'd never noticed before, or some real threats that they identify that, again, you had never thought about as being threats. And when you do this with your team, you are showing them, I care about your opinion. It matters. It's valuable. And for them, again, it takes them up that hierarchy to a, hey, I'm necessary. I am useful. All that way up, I am reaching my full potential because I am not just a teacher or a staff member. I am a contributing member of this team who is helping to make sure that our organization is moving forward positively, right? So it puts our teachers, it puts our staff members on a completely different level of the trust that we're putting in them, and giving them so much more autonomy and investment in our organization as well.
So Jenna, I have a quick question.
Sure.
Sorry, I'm fighting a cold right now. I don't have much of a voice.
No problem.
But going back to the intellectual stimulation,
yeah.
I know you showed the SWOT, but do you have more suggestions of like how to intentionally integrate gathering their opinions and perspectives? Just like thinking of my school, I'm the school counselor, but I'm part of our leadership team with my principal and deeper learning coach.
Yeah.
And, you know, we always are asking for feedback, but the trend I notice is no one will really say anything in the moment, but they talk amongst each other and then it like gets back to us. And it's really frustrating because
Yep.
we try to be open and inclusive and supportive, but there's still like that fear to actually like be honest about how they're feeling. So I'd love just some suggestions of how to intentionally integrate this skill.
Yeah, no, great. I'm going to give you one of my hacks, and I don't know that this is like what would be considered the most well, I'll just tell you what it is. You can make your own judgment. So here's what I've done, because even though I consider myself to be a very approachable person, I think I've really put it out there. I try to be very supportive of my teachers. I make sure that if there's, if there's a parent issue, my teachers always come first. I'm very much that person. So I've tried to create that, but this still happens. This still happens. We'll discuss something in a faculty meeting, and then later on I'll hear like, oh, well, so-and-so said, and I'm like, come on, everyone, just come right to me. Here's what I've done. I've identified my people on staff who tend to always be the people that those people go talk to. And I've really established a rapport where I can go in and say, okay, give it to me straight. What are people saying? Where are we at? And then after that, I take it to those individuals and I say, hey, so I heard, without throwing somebody under the bus, that maybe you're feeling a little bit of this way. Can we talk about it? And I have gotten better at that in the last few years of stepping into the uncomfortable conversations as the leader. And it is always uncomfortable to start, but rarely does it actually end in an uncomfortable way. And so I found that individually directing it is what is best. So I really go to my people first, who seem to apparently hear everything and use that as a jumping off point. The other thing that I found is that sometimes I don't give people enough time to process in the moment of a meeting. Okay, so I had this big moment of self-actualization at the end in our poster meetings this year. I let teachers towards the end of the year on an anonymous document throw on items for discussion at the end of the year. I know, super dangerous, but they throw them on there, and then I put them on the agenda. And then we get to the end of the year and I go, okay, so somebody put this and this, and then I'll say, whoever it was, let's talk about it, right? And then they have to talk about it, because I don't know what they want to say about it. But what I realized this year is like, there's some people who are silent that whole conversation. It doesn't matter who's talking. I have like 3 individuals on staff who didn't chime in once. And so I thought really hard about it. And I talked to one of the teachers about it, and they said, you know what? I don't think everybody can process in real time. We put some really big issues on the table and then we ask for immediate feedback. And some people are going, whoa, I have not had time to think about this, to process it, to even give you an opinion. And I said, that's really insightful. I should really be giving these topics out a week before the meetings and have those people who have suggestions or even my agenda items give some more context. These are the things that we really want to talk about. Throw an example in there. If they want to come up with a new, a new newsletter template or something, throw an example in there for us to look at. Let's all look at that proactively, think about it, process it, and then come to the meeting ready to talk. And then I'll do a lot of, people can leave anonymous, we'll open up a document, people can, anonymously drop in comments, questions, whatever. But that's something to think about too. I don't know if you've ever done that, where you've done, maybe we're asking them to process too much real time and people are afraid to speak up in the moment.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We try to build processing time into meetings if we can, but I understand that's probably still not enough. And we've definitely identified the people to talk to,
Mhm.
but they tend to be more on the naysayer side of things, so it
Oh,
tends to get toxic kind of quickly.
yeah,
But that was very helpful when you said, being comfortable stepping into the uncomfortable conversation. So thank you.
yeah, yeah. And you know what? There's plenty of people that I've worked with before that we really don't see eye to eye and we disagree on a lot of things. And I have found over the years that I've just become a more patient person. I've become a better listener. I've been able to not let their comments affect me so personally, and to instead really, really come from a place of empathy to go, okay, I'm going to look at this from their perspective. And it does change the way that I phrase my responses. I'm less defensive. I'm a little bit more open. And that really changes the tone of the conversation too, especially with the naysayers, because if they're always jumping into the negative, I try to really keep it in the positive as much as I can, because sometimes, not always, but sometimes for negative people, they see like, wow, I'm suddenly the only negative person in the room, and even some of them have a little bit of realization of, I could probably be a little bit more positive about this too. But I would love if anybody else has things to drop in the chat. I love that. Thank you, Heather, for that comment. Yep. Need those hallway conversations to process. Oh, that's another really good point, Heather. Verbal processors. Oof, yeah, you will have some verbal processors on staff. And that's hard because sometimes verbal processing really comes across as gossip. But for some people, they truly are verbal processors. They actually need to talk through all of it in order to come to a conclusion. The question is, can you as a leader, can you create a relationship of safety where you become the person they verbally process with rather than someone else? I think that's the key. And for a lot of us, once again, it's proximity. I'm not close enough to all my teachers to be their verbal processor companion. So they pick the closest person. So it's my reminder to check in with teachers more, to stop in during a prep period. Hey, how you doing? To give them opportunity to verbally process too. So yes, thank you for saying that, Heather. That's incredibly accurate. Thank you for bringing that up, Kristen. I really appreciate that. So I wanted to quickly, before we get into just a little bit more conversation, I just wanted to quickly do this because I think it's really interesting, because I gave you 6 different characteristics and practices, and some of them you might go, okay, I don't know that I can really dive into all 6 of these. So where should I prioritize my time? So I did some research this past year. I did it in schools in Wisconsin, Minnesota, kind of across the Midwest. And I surveyed teachers and administrators. They took a transformational leadership survey and a school climate survey, and to see the correlation. And what I found is that there's a strong positive correlation between all 6 of these and open school climate. So all of them have strong correlations. However, the strongest 2 in my research, which was very recent, was fostering acceptable goals and provides the appropriate model. Those were the 2 that had the largest impact on open school climate. Again, that was across a variety of schools. And so when I looked at that, as the researcher, because of course I'm just a little bit of a, I'm a little fond of my own research. Sorry, that's what happens when you spend your, 3 years on it, is I looked at this and said, okay, so what am I doing? What am I really doing to foster acceptable goals? What am I really doing with my team? How am I really building collaboration? Is it a priority or is it an afterthought? because I tell you my list to do is huge. So it's often an afterthought. How do I prioritize that? And then what am I doing to consistently be the model for my teachers? And that is also, that's also hard and a lot of work. So those are a couple areas that if you're going, hey, where should I focus my attention? Finding that at some schools, again, kind of in our area, the Midwest area here, those would be the two highest correlated. And those were closely followed by individual support and intellectual stimulation. So, but yeah, these two were the highest correlated, which was very interesting. So some of the questions that I had for you to think about, and then the last point is what I was hoping some more people would kind of chime in with either questions or ideas for best practices. But some self-reflection is, where do you feel like you fall on this transformational scale? Are you a 1, like, whew, I'm not doing much of this at all? Or are you closer to a 5, you go, actually, I think I'm doing a lot of these things. If you had to gauge your school climate from 1, pretty close climate, we're not seeing a lot of this, to 5, where does your school fall? Do you feel like your school has fostered this open climate? And then the third one, what are your biggest barriers to making changes as a leader? So what Kristen brought up was, hey, this is a struggle that we're facing. So what are some of the challenges that you feel like, man, this is going to be a tough one to overcome in order to implement some of these characteristics? And then once, we've kind of thought about those, what are some best practices in this area? So I'm going to give you some processing time. And then if you'd like to drop something in the chat or just chime in, we still have about 15 minutes. I would love to just have a little bit of time for conversation or questions or anything like that. So I'll set a timer for some think time first. Okay, there's my timer. Anyone have anything to chime in on? Any questions, comments, or any best practices you'd like to share?
I have one. I don't know that I necessarily have the career-wise authority to say that it's a best practice, but it is something that worked really well on a team I was leading at my previous school. We were noticing that we had a lot of just like, especially because of COVID changes, and feeling like, some of the staff had joined the year that we were starting out as hybrid. So we had like 40% of the kids in the building, 60% of them at home. And then we switched to all in person, and then we switched back to virtual. And then the next year we started all virtual. So we just realized there was a lot of like building wide procedures that no one trained the new staff on for almost 3 years, because we didn't have fire drills. We didn't have all those things. So I decided to start hosting like new teacher luncheons, but it was for anyone who had been hired in the past 3 years. And we started off by like, well, first the school paid for lunch. So that was amazing. And then we started off by just asking like, okay, what is one common like behavior or struggle that you're seeing in your classroom that you feel like you might need some crowdsourcing to be able to manage? And then if we couldn't think of a solution together as a group, or if we had like tried that last time and then they needed more support, I just like kept track of those things and then sent them to the assistant principal afterwards as kind of a like, here's a general behavior that we've been seeing that's a struggle. And then from a logistical side, we like played different games, which sounds silly, but it made people feel more lighthearted, I think, to be like, okay, I'll give you XYZ prize if someone can name like the 5 steps to a fire drill or an intruder drill at our school, all these things. And then that helped us kind of like realize where the like areas where that staff needed some support as far as like procedures. And that was super helpful. And we started doing them every other month. So it was super short, like just 40 minutes, but frequent enough that I feel like people really started to get to know each other better. And it was actually like an admin free space. I was kind of like the liaison person. And that helped, I think, for people to feel like, okay, I can ask a question that might seem really stupid, but like my principal's not here, so they won't know that I didn't know the answer to that. So that's just one thing that really helped, I think, everyone get on the same page.
Yeah, I love that idea of the team camaraderie. And I think then my challenge to the leadership team would be, how do you get invited into that space without being a threat? Because I love that you were the liaison and you had a safe space for that. But when I look at transformational leadership, I think, okay, so how could your VP have made a way where there was that level of safety and trust? And again, with COVID, it's been really, really hard. But that would be my challenge then, because that is an awesome practice. And you get a member of the leadership team involved in that, maybe not even every meeting, but enough that they feel like, hey, this is also a safe person. And maybe that helps to start, with some of the issues that Kristen was talking about. Maybe that is what starts breaking down some of those barriers in larger meetings, because, okay, I've had safe conversation with this VP in kind of a lunch casual setting. I'm feeling a little bit more confident that I could bring something up in a larger group setting.
Totally.
Yeah. And because I think a lot of us, we struggle with feeling, we don't want to be the person that makes a suggestion everybody looks at and goes, that was dumb. None of us want to feel that way, especially not in front of your kind of leaders or your superiors or whatever. So that's great. Thank you. That's an awesome practice.
Yeah, I think what you touched on that was maybe missing where I was working previously was that lack of defensiveness. Like if someone would say, I'm sorry, could you just explain why we do XYZ thing this way? And it was sometimes a very like, you don't understand how busy we are and how hard we work. And everyone was like, whoa, yeah, we were just asking why we have to go out that door, like all those guys. Right. So thank you.
Yep. Yeah. Good. Anyone else?
I'll say one of my barriers is time. I'm a chair, so I have maybe a quarter to a third course release to do leadership. And it's so all of these things that you're talking about sound absolutely wonderful. And the professional development that I need to grow into my leadership role sounds absolutely wonderful. And I'm a month done with spring semester and I'm still not done with my feedback to my students. I'm still not with my administrative feedback, my peer reviews. And I know that my faculty are just as behind as I am. So I think one of the challenges as we think about some of these wonderful community building activities that you're talking about and professional development opportunities is how to schedule them in when we're all working understaffed, doing the jobs of multiple people that haven't been replaced yet or can't be replaced because of budget issues.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. Heather, I was gonna say Heather and I was like, oh, make sure it's Heather. It was Heather. Good. Two things that I would say. So one of the things we found for staff collegiality, one of the things that we did, we started scheduling them around school events that are already happening. So for example, oh, it's our Christmas program. Guess what, everyone, we're going out for drinks after the Christmas program. You're already out. You already have a babysitter for your kids. So that was one that we tried because that was a huge, it still happens for us. We're a small staff. It still happens. It's impossible. Every time we schedule something, we're like, oh, I can't because of this, whatever. So that was one of our hacks this year. We're like, okay, we already have something going on. So we're going to do something after it because, we have a lot of young kids. So we do that. The second thing I found, because you're absolutely right, Heather, and I am not standing here saying that I am the perfect leader in any of these things. I'm so not. So I try to do like really small things. Here's one of the really small things I did that made a big difference. I started doing staff shout outs at the beginning of faculty meetings. So I pick 2 or 3 people. I keep a running list so that I make sure that I'm, sharing the wealth a little bit. And it's how we start our meetings. We always start off on a high note. So I talk about something great that's happening in our school. And then the next one is staff and teacher shout outs. And it can be anyone for anything. And it just changes the tone, but it also shows individual consideration. I care about you. I see the work that you're doing. And sometimes that does make me pay closer attention and check in a little bit more. So that's one. I also do like small notes in people's mailboxes. So I work at a parochial school. So sometimes I do little prayer notes for people and it takes me like 4 minutes. 4 minutes and it's done. But I'll try to do that for maybe somebody who I've just been noticing their energy hasn't been there, whatever. So I find I'm just like you. I don't have time to do big things. So I pick small things that are achievable. And then every year I have to pick a couple of big things, but small achievable is what I can be consistent with. Good. Anything else as we wrap up? Also, Heather, I am 3 weeks out from school and not even close enough with my to-do list either. So I'm right there with you.
I know a barrier that comes up for us, especially when it's that period before Christmas break or the period before summer when everyone's just really, really stressed and busy. We all tend to, you know, fall back into the habits that are just easier for us, which is just in our nature. I do it. So what my leadership team, we try to recognize, when people are in that space, like not trying to push forward things that we're not ready for yet, and changing what the staff meeting focus is going to be, or making it something fun instead of trying to push forward agendas that aren't going to be received if everyone's so stressed. And I've noticed that made a big difference, especially this year with what a tough year it was for everybody.
Yeah, 1,000%. That is so perceptive and so true. I remember my first year here when it was the end of, my first year of leadership, and I gave everybody a book for over the summer, and they were like, really? You're going to do that? You're going to do that right now? Your first year here, we're all figuring things out, and you want us to leave school and then go read a book and do a book study over the summer. I'm going to rethink that. But yeah, knowing your timing and knowing your audience. I have 2 different weeks during the year that one is during Teacher Appreciation Week, but the other one is I create a staff wellness week. And it's a little bit of upfront work, but I pull in my PTL and other people to help out with it. And it's just like a week where random treats will show up, or I'll show up and cover a lunch or recess duty. And it's just little moments that I do for those teachers. And I tend to pick February, March-ish, when everybody has hit rock bottom, we're all done. And so I focus on that week of as many little things that I can do to kind of build morale. And then I pull in other people to help me do that for that exact reason, Kristen, because that is not the time of year to start pushing forward initiatives. It's to build morale and make people feel better. Yeah. Oh, yes. Yes, Heather. Canceling. I know I have had a couple times where I go, oh, no faculty meeting this Tuesday because it's a crazy week, and people do. It is one of the greatest gifts you can give. Less meetings. Okay, wonderful. I know that you guys probably have other things that other sectionals that you're working on this morning or that you're going to. So I did draw my email address into the chat. And again, I am a new doctor. I have not been doing this for 25 years. And so I do not even pretend to have all the answers, but I love collaborating. I love talking about these kind of things. I do have some great people and resources I can point you towards if you're looking for them. Or if you're just looking for another partner in education, please feel free to shoot me an email. Let's connect. I'm way up here in Sheboygan, but fortunately we have lots of technology that can keep us connected too. I really appreciate you. I appreciate your time. I know you guys are also finishing up school years and are so ready to be done. So thanks for taking time. I hope that something from today was helpful and practical that you can take back to your schools.